All right, so some questions have been gathered. So I'm going to take just a quick moment and work through those questions, and we'll see where we're going. Obviously, if I don't get something, you can email me and we'll follow up. I'll be happy to answer it. So, a question here by Patrick Uru, librarian in the Italian Provincial Library, talks about the idea of oral history in the libraries. And do you think the practice of oral history in the library can be seen as a way to fill the gap between the library and the community, as well as a method to foster relationships between community members, and also as a way to inspire new narratives that can be stored in the library in order to build a community collection of oral sources inside a community library? Answer is absolutely yes. I'm a huge fan of oral histories. That idea of how do we take the knowledge that's in its community. One way that I talk a lot about is having them come in and provide services, lead discussions, workshops, classes, hikes, trips, tours, what have you, where people are working side by side with librarians to help educate the rest of the community. But there is also the idea of creating access to these memories, to these ideas, to these stories, local and resident within a community, that is vital. And so it is absolutely an important way of doing it. And an example. So in the Netherlands, in Tilburg, one of the a great public library, the Lokaal, began its life as an old railroad repair warehouse. In Tilburg, that was the primary industry. Railroads and trains from around Europe came into these massive warehouses where engineers and workers would repair them, build them, change them, fix them, and get them going. An industry that disappeared, an industry that moved overseas. And Tilburg had its time, but it came back. And as it came back, it began to think about how it could expand and looked at a public library. It was time for a new public library with a larger mission. And they looked and said, we're going to put it here in these old train warehouses. But they didn't just start with a blueprint and go and build. What they started with were pop-up libraries. They would go and use different ways of creating sort of quick interactive experiences that people from the community could come in and use. They created co-working spaces. They created a stage with a bar where they would get people coming into these spaces, getting used to these spaces, and then asking them, what are the kinds of things you'd like us to continue doing? When we build in this space, what are the things we should put here? So not simply saying, we're going to take what we used to do and we're going to do it in a new building, but they said, given what we have, what can we do here? And one of the most brilliant things they did was they put large monitors around the space. And through those monitors, visitors could come and see what used to be in a place. This corner used to be where they would do gears, and this one used to be where they do upholstery, and this one used to be, etc. But what's brilliant about this is not simply could you get these images and overlays, but community members coming in going saying, I used to work in that corner. I used to do that work, could, through these systems, with librarians facilitate, leave their story, create oral histories around that, and take a physical location and begin amplifying these different layers and layers of experience and history and value and meaning and emotion, all of the space. And so when they opened the new space, it was based on these conversations, it was based on these experiments, and it became a really beautiful community-owned vision of the community. And those oral histories didn't just help build it, they then became one of the primary collections within it. So oral histories, I think, are a really important way of us looking at the community for living history, to provide context. There's another great program through Philadelphia called Philaplace. And they had a situation that as the city was growing, some of the minority communities within Philadelphia, they were losing population. Children were going off to college and not coming back. And so over time, there became fewer and fewer people who truly understood the history of the different places. And so Philaplace did a couple of things. They allowed people to come in and scan digital archives and items so they could create image collections. But what was amazing is they then took city elders, they put them on buses, and as they drove through the city, the elders would recount their stories and that would be recorded and captured. And so these sort of oral history trips going through the city collected it. I saw it again in Korea. In Seoul, there is a huge expansion. They're building like crazy. And what they do is they'll find old buildings that may have had a lot of history, but they'll come down for larger buildings for more space, for more services. And the South Koreans in these villages have learned to celebrate the history. That when this modernization occurs, when the new building occurs, they celebrate by literally coming to the space and gathering and celebrating and remembering, but also then gathering stories and preserving those stories in the library so that that village has this archive and there's a connection from the past to the present to the future. So it's a fantastic question. I'm really glad you're doing that work. And I think that you're absolutely right that oral histories have a crucial role to play. And now with the technology, it's easier and easier, right? You have a phone, you have time, you have a grandparent, you have the makings of an oral history project. I think it's a fabulous way of doing it. Okay, another question. The participatory strategies of academic libraries are becoming increasingly complex, yes, and multiform. One of the target audience is that of citizens, non-academics, non-experts. How can we involve them in public engagement initiatives? What strategies to implement? I really like, when we talk about new librarianship or community librarianship is always new. Every dynamic, useful, valuable field in society is constantly reinventing itself. So a lot of what I'll do is like, well, we used to do this. Not as in, why did we used to do this? But this is what we learned in doing this, and this is how it helps us move forward. And so, for example, we know that in the US, one of the ways that academic libraries would engage with its public is through sharing collections. Literally, people could come in and get to government documents. They could get to a larger collection that a local public library couldn't afford. So it becomes an access mechanism. But what we're learning is as people are going in, there is expertise in that local community that may not be academic in its nature. In other words, the expertise of someone who understands how to do wilderness survival or how to do whitewater rafting or how to do some sort of outside excursion doesn't show up in a degree in physics. And so by putting those two together, the physics students can begin to learn about how to explore the world they're in, and the wilderness expert can learn about what the library is like, so you can try to bridge the divide between this is academia and this is the community. And so part of it's just making an invitation, asking people to come in and not simply come in and use, but come in and share. What are they talking about? What are they using? And we've begun to realize that many academic settings, and I apologize, this might be a US-Italy divide, but in the US, a lot of academia begins to separate out from the community that's in. They tend to, the folks tend to stay within the university, they tend to buy within the university, they tend to congregate with the university, and so it becomes this divide. And so what we're seeing is that academic librarians are realizing that they're running cities, that their academia isn't just about their mental well-being, but their physical well-being. In the US, we have, unfortunately, a number of our students who, to afford tuition, can't afford housing. We have homeless people as students, and they need social support. They need the idea of how to get different services. They need to understand what's available to them. And so it becomes a partnership not only between the academic library, where, by the way, a lot of these folks show up because it's their one safe, warm, useful place to be, how they can really connect in with the community that may be working on the same situation, how we can begin to look at this engine of innovation where questions from the public come into the academic library, and academic libraries can array the services of a university around community questions. I'm in Austin. Austin's a lovely city. It's got technologists, it's got hippies, it's got live music, and it's got a big university. And one of the things that Austin knows is as people have come to love and live in Austin, it's gotten very expensive. And so one of the things the university is doing is it's starting an initiative around affordable housing. It's asking our sociologists and our politicians and our information scientists and what have you to think about ways of improving the livability, the affordability of people in Austin, which has a direct impact on taxes and citizenship and where we do development and where the highways go. Those kinds of partnerships are becoming increasingly important, and libraries are in a unique and important position to connect them together. Because as an information scientist, my job is to think about the information science aspect, and the policy person is to think about policy. But librarians work with all of them, and they can begin to marshal different expertise around topics of common interest with local communities. Can the library innovation and transformation be successful if you don't have a clear vision and mission? No. But that's not to say we need to do a lot more strategic planning in our lives. One, I think we have a mission to improve blah, blah, blah. But I get it. It's a general mission. We can continuously serve. What I'm not particularly interested in is looking at the library as a set of 5 activities that are going to be implemented over the next 5 years to have these outcomes. We need to be dynamic because our world is going to change minute by minute. What we do need to have is a platform. Instead of thinking of the library as an institution with a direction and outcomes that are going to be achieved within X number of years, think of it as a platform for community innovation and inclusion. Right? We have services. We have a collection. We have logistical expertise. We have content and information expertise. We have civil prestige. We have all of these kinds of things. And when a community comes in and says, we want to worry about affordability, we want to worry about equity, we want to worry about long-term livability, we want to worry about rural areas where we have a lot of brain drain, where people are moving out of the rural communities, the library is a platform that can allow all those things to happen. So our mission and direction is to make sure this platform has the right services and is responsive, not to define all the ways it's going to be used. So the idea is we have a mission. We want to maintain that platform. We want to have our general mission of making sure our community is smarter and learning is involved and important. But then we want to be agile in how people want to advocate and use that to improve society. And that's where things get really interesting, because where libraries have in the past used the template. This is what a library is. It's a collection. It's public service. It's technical service. It's open from 3 to 8, etc. That template as in place of the impact we want to have, which is this is what we do. I'm sure it will have impact. We don't know, is changing, which is now the idea is we have these things so that we can have community impact. And our communities are very different. People living in Florence, living in Rome, living in Calabria, living in Sicily, blah, blah, blah. They're all very different. They can be very different from one, mile to the next. And the library, instead of looking like the same all over, needs to look just like that community. So if we're in Assisi, it's going to look like Assisi. It's going to build on Assisi's skills. It's going to build on their interests, their collections, their advocacy, their needs, their opportunities, their dreams. And it's going to look very different than a city across the valley, because they're going to do the same thing. And each community is dynamic. And what that means is there's no one mission. I mean, they may have the same mission, improving society, knowledge, but they're going to look really different. And the role of the librarian there is not to learn and make this one look like this one. It's to constantly connect and say, hey, we're trying this. How would it work over there? Ooh, you did that. How would it work over here? And adapting to the local community. So the long and short answer is, can we innovate and transform without a clear vision? No, but the vision should be about how do we look more like a community and have positive impact than here are the 5 things we want to do. I mean, you can't ever say you've improved something if you don't know where it currently is, which I think is a question we're getting to. But yes, a clear vision, but it's a clear vision of serving the community with our values and our means and our knowledge, our mission, not a clear mission as in the following 5 things are the things we always will do forever and ever. But what can we put in place to let our communities go crazy and do new things and be innovative and really try new things? Okay. Different innovation programs can extend library services. How to prioritize given insufficient resources. Interesting timing. The next book, which will probably turn into Italian at some point, I'm calling it Less Better. Do less, but do it better. Community librarianship can be an excuse to do anything you want, right? You can always find a community member who wants to learn about cooking, and so we put a kitchen in the library. If that's what we're defining it as, anything that can be used for learning and community improvement fits in a library. What doesn't fit that definition? Whether it's baking, whether it's gardening, whether it's reading, whether it's whatever it is. So how do we pick? Your point, we can't do it all. And the answer is, what's your local community need? not what every community needs. Librarianship tends to be a bit trendy. It tends to be, oh, makerspaces are cool, we got to do a makerspace. Oh, now it's gardening programs, we got to do a gardener. Oh, now it's, we got to stop that. What does your community want to be? Does it want to be a well-read community? We better focus on collections. Does it want to be a community that is about civil rights and social justice? Then maybe it looks like a UN-sponsored grove of cypress planted in support of those who fight for human rights. Is it about a place and a location to be? Then it looks like a cafe. Then it looks like the public square. That's what happens is when you're defining what to do and what not, because you're right, we have limited resources. The answer is, what does the community need to advance? Not what do we define as this is the minimum of a library. What does the community need? And that turns into what we should do. And if there are things that we've done for 30 years that we no longer need to do, we need to celebrate them, because without that, we could never have gotten here. And then we need to talk about not doing it anymore. And that's hard because people rightly take ownership in the work that they do. But once again, the message is not that's useless. That has no value. We don't do that anymore. The value is thank God you've done that. Thank goodness we've done that for all the time, so we're ready for the next thing. Okay, how can we determine the impact we would have on the community? How can we measure it? Yes. And so a lot of the measurements and statistics you'll see in assessment are great, but they tend to be around a traditional model of libraries that are about collections and materials. Once again, that may serve your community well, but if it doesn't, then things like circulation data, then things like gate counts, then things like volume counts don't help. So what you need to do is you need to start by understanding what your community looks like. And that's basic demographic information, but it's also what are the sub-communities do we have? Do we have college students? Do we have different college students? Do we have homemakers, but do we have homemakers that want to become college students? How can we really get a richness of our community and what they know? It begins by building that. Then what we do is we say, all right, here are our sub-communities. Here's what our sub-communities are talking about. Here's what they're trying to do. Are they trying to deal with economic issues? Are they trying to deal with education issues? Are they trying to deal with land management issues? Are they trying to deal with degree completion issues? Are they trying to deal with homelessness, with crisis, with etc.? Then, and only then, do we begin to look at what the library can do to support those conversations, those knowledge-driven activities. And our assessment, instead of based on utilization of what we have, is did that conversation move forward? Do the people having that conversation, do they feel it made a difference? So, an example. South Carolina, here in the United States, there's a city called Charleston. And a horrible thing happened in Charleston. A white supremacist went into a church, sat through a Bible study, got up, and shot 7 black parishioners. It was a horrible, horrible incident. And it began a dialogue about inclusion, diversity, equity within the state of South Carolina. 10 years later, after George Floyd was killed by a white cop, a black man killed by a white cop, again, in Charleston, racial riots erupted, people broke windows, and the community leaders came to the library and said, we have not done enough in 10 years. Clearly, we said it and we grew awareness, but nothing happened in that 10 years to make this happen again. Library, please help us figure out how to have a useful conversation around this topic. And the library didn't just convene a meeting where they talked about it. That was one thing. They didn't really, they did things like make sure that they had library services in traditionally black areas. But what's amazing is they then began doing things like they would host where people would vote would be in the library. When COVID came around, when they needed to be tested or when they needed to be vaccinated, they could do that in the library. And librarians were telling them, I got my shot so I can do this. So they were modeling. In their more rural areas, they began providing free food and cool lockers. Anyone would stop in and grab fresh fruit, vegetables. In other words, what they began doing is saying, yes, we have inequity here. Yes, that driving inequity is causing this problem. But the solution is not just to say, yes, let's talk about it. It's let's begin to advocate and create tools for people to improve their situation in life, to have a stronger voice in governance, and to really advocate for their own needs. That's an example where that's driving innovation from the community and then back to the impact issue. You don't measure that because did that lead to greater circulation or checkouts? Who knows? Did it lead to greater democratic participation in voters turnout? Did it lead to greater vaccination issues? Did it lead to better nutritional outcomes? These kinds of things don't feel like libraries, but once again, the point's not the library. The point's a better community. And therefore, our measures need to be not necessarily what the library does, but what does the community do and how have they gotten better? All right. What community participation should we seek for accessibility of library spaces, cultural heritage activities? How can the community of all of which the library is a part respond to the right to read and cultural accessibility for all? Yay! I love this because learning is about conversations and conversations are about stories. Oral history from our earlier talk. How do we bring people in to have these conversations? And this is a place where we can begin to talk about cultural heritage because those conversations, our culture is shaped by what we talk about and the consequences of those, how we institutionalize them, how we build them, how we represent them in art, in culture, in statuary, how we look at our past, right? What we inherit from our past to shape our present, to hand to the future, right? That's what our cultural heritage is about. And libraries can do a great job. They can share the stories, they can capture the stories. They can also provide access to the artifacts of culture, right? We can provide museum membership. We can provide connections for people to local experts and tours and guides to provide around it. We can build relationships between the public library and the public museum so we can have ongoing dialogue. Another Korean example, I went into a beautiful public library and it was the public library of the picture book. And the entire library, while a public library, was dedicated to illustration of children and adult illustrated books. They had a gallery space because this wonderful city had no museum, so they built a gallery space and they hired people with gallery expertise on illustration, on children's books illustrations from Poland and around the world. And then they would collect a research documentary, the research on it, the documentation, the scholarship on it, so people interested in illustration could come learn about it. And then they had a beautiful children's book and illustrated book collection for the public to use and read. They looked at they even had a theater where they have amazing puppet works. And the idea being that the library is a cultural space. In Chester, England, the Story House is now one of the most used cultural heritage institutions in England. And it's a library, but that library's collections are wound around coffee shops, performance spaces, theaters, the idea that people can come in and see live music, they can go and they can eat and they can drink and they can check out and they can discuss books, and it becomes a place where the community continues its cultural conversation. It embraces live music, it embraces live theater, and embraces literature, and then helps produce it and distribute it and sends it out, where the library truly becomes a publisher of the community. Once again, in Seoul, there's a beautiful library that teaches classes on how to do illustration and manga illustrations, and teens come and use it, and then they can publish their books. And that means not only do they print it out and provide it in the collection, but they can ship it to other places and have people sell it, become a platform for it, so they can truly distribute the information work. All right, this is my last question here. I'm going too long, I'm sure. Critical librarianship and community librarianship, are they the same? What's the difference? I don't know. Here's the deal. We talk about, this is an academic problem. We love to think that we invented something, so we give it a name. New librarianship, community-based librarianship. It's all librarianship. We're all struggling, and I mean that in the best way. We're all wrestling to do the best job we can, given the mission that we have, given our values, how we do this. What that means is, many of us argue, we need to put the community not only at the center of what we do as if we're examining it, but interspersed throughout what we're doing. We're standing side by side with our community to have an impact in society. When we do that, when we look to have an impact in society, when we look to make things better in our mission, when we talk about improving society, we have to have a sense of what needs improving. We have to have a sense of what needs to be better. We have to have a definition of better. That's why we're not neutral. That's why we're not unbiased. We believe that communities that read more are better. We believe that communities that provide access to a wider range of resources that fight censorship are better. We have a stake in this game. That means that we need to be critical. And I don't mean critical as in just picking at. Critical as in critical theory, critical understandings, is the idea of taking a system, governance system, local, national, international, taking institutions, libraries, museums, town halls, police forces, and deconstructing them, looking at the parts and pieces, looking at what's hidden. What are the assumptions that went into this? What do we now take as normal, and how did it become normal? And so in that way, critical and community librarianship are hand in hand. Our communities need to learn how to look at organizations critically, to seek a way to build better justice and diversity in them, and then side by side, librarian and community member, advocating and being a force for positive change. So are they different? Are they the same? They're only different in the sense that they're different communities talking about them, but they both need each other. Critical theory, if all we do is say, well, this is what's wrong and this is the injustice and this is how the system is broken, is not helpful because it just creates discontent. Community librarianship, when it's just about making people feel happy and all volunteers and giving them whatever they need, is vacuous. It doesn't have impact. It's only when the two come together, when we say these are the systemic things we need to improve our society, our community, our locality, our institutions, and we are going to work side by side and empower people to do it, that we make a positive change. Ultimately, new librarianship, community librarianship, it starts with the possibilities that everything can be a library, but only if it makes the world a better place and only if it helps us understand why. That's what it comes down to. I thank you for your questions. I thank you for your time. I thank you for your attention. And I thank the Anna Maria, the editors, and the publishers so much for making this happen. And I look forward to continuing the conversation.